Now, in between the time of the earliest scholastics such as Abelard, who was born in 1079, and the later scholastic like Aquinas, who was born in 1225, there were two key changes in the West, and I think it's important to outline them before we go any further. The first of these was the Crusades. These were a series of holy wars between the Christians and the Muslims. Now, 1096 had seen the declaration of the First Crusade by the Pope. This was at the request of the Byzantine Empire, who wanted support to drive the Turks back out of their lands, and it also became a quest to take back Jerusalem from the Muslims, the most holy city in Christendom. So across Christian Europe, a motley array of peasants and knights answered the call, and this was very successful. They succeeded in establishing numerous states across the north of the Muslim Empire and took back Jerusalem. And this action, together with the Reconquista against the Spanish Muslims, resulted in the West encountering many of the Caliphate's ideas for the first time, things we almost take for granted these days, such as alchemy and algebra, generally words beginning with Al, will have an Arabic root and have been greatly developed by the Caliphate. And also the Muslims' numerical system, which was much more efficient than Roman numerals, was brought back as well. Now, the Muslims regrouped after 100 years and under Saladin reconquered Jerusalem, and despite the best efforts of later crusaders such as Richard the Lionheart of England on the Third Crusade, who got within sight of the gates of the city, the West wouldn't hold Jerusalem again for over 600 years until the British took it in about 1920 odd. However, the Crusaders would succeed in taking a more important city by accident. The story behind this is quite interesting. Basically, there had been proposals for a fourth crusade after the failure of Richard the Lionheart in the Third Crusade, and the idea was they were going to sail a bunch of knights across the Mediterranean in Venetian ships. So Venice was expecting 30,000 ships and had most of its craftsmen busy working on these ships, and only 10,000 knights turned up. While the Venetians said, you can't get away with not paying for the ships, so we've got to get the money from somewhere, and there were various proposals bandied about, but eventually it was decided the best way to get the money back would be to support an individual who the Crusaders had been wrongfully deposed from the Byzantine throne, to get back a large amount of gold from Byzantium, and of course, not having access to anything at the minute, it obviously made sense to that individual to promise a lot of Byzantine gold. So the Crusaders sailed east to Constantinople, where they took the city after a bloody battle, and they ended up having enough gold to pay back the Venetians, but also basically destroyed the ancient capital of Byzantium and basically destroyed the Byzantine Empire. It would continue on for a further 200 years, but it would never be the same again. So this had two effects. It marked the end of the eastern expansion of the Crusades due to the loss of a Byzantine bridgehead, and it also led to many Byzantine scholars and original Greek manuscripts coming to the West for the first time, which would fuel the Renaissance later on. The second change was a kind of internal reform movement within the Church. That's the Catholic Church. Monastic orders had existed previously, but they began to become codified, so you had the Cistercians set up in 1098 and the Franciscans in 1209. And these sort of monastic orders had a lot of money given to them by the local rulers, who were no longer plagued by quite as many hordes of barbarians invading. And the church tended to invest this in beautiful buildings, and also to some extent in scholarship. So in the buildings, the previous Romanesque cathedrals gave way to Gothic cathedrals, which used the Gothic arch and the flying buttress to enable taller and more elaborate structures to be built than anything that the Romans had attempted. And in addition, the 2D icons of Byzantium and the flat portraits of, say, the Anglo-Saxons gave way to 3D sculpture, so we're almost getting to a similar quality of life to that was in Rome. Other than the preservation of knowledge, it would seem that the monastic reforms didn't have much effect on the day-to-day life, at least not in our day-to-day lives today. And yet they're responsible for something that affects nearly all of us, and that's the separate legal personality of the corporation. Now, there have been something a bit like a company or a corporation previously, the Roman Collegium, but the church had a big role in kind of driving what we would consider as a company today. And that's the idea that it's more than each of its members. So, because the monks and nuns were encouraged to become celibate at this time, and they couldn't have heirs naturally, the church corporations were set up, and they could keep land even after the death of individual members. The upshot of this, of course, was that the church didn't want to give back much of this land, and a lot of land gradually ended up in the hands of the Catholic Church, making it very powerful. There's a few other organisations that we can still see today, or their descendants today, beginning to come into existence. One of these was the guild system, which was a group of skilled craftsmen allied together, and you could consider this to be a forerunner of modern trade unions, kind of keeping trade secrets and trying to get higher pay for their profession. And in addition, universities such as Bologna, Paris and Oxford had also begun to be set up and attain something resembling their modern form. Into this post-Roman world of abbeys, universities and crusaders was born Thomas Aquinas, who would later be adopted as the official philosopher of the Catholic Church.